Oh, missed the best bit. So I'm from the Centre for Sustainable Innovation, and we have some other professors specialising in digital transformation and sustainability, but I sit in the middle of all of that and sort of span both disciplines. So next slide, please, Gemma. What I've done in this slide is really, this is the story, the narration for today, and it does go back quite a long way when Matt and I were at university. So I'm going to give you an age away now, Matt, which we graduated in 1995, and that's when my journey really began with applied research in the area of systems thinking and cybernetics. And what you will hear about the interventions, there's 5 interventions, they're called up there A to E, were evolutions of designing human intervention for positive change in a variety of situations, each getting more and more complex. So I'll also share with you the basic initial one, which wasn't really basic or initial, it was quite substantial, moving into really complex design structures, and then how I've moved my thinking since beyond 2012, if that's okay with everyone. So I'll start first. What happened to me post 1995? So I was quite fortunate, as probably Matt probably will consider himself fortunate. The degree programme we did, and I was a mature student, I haven't aged really quickly, I was a mature student at university, so I'd had a life, had a family, went back to university, and this thing called computers and technology was one of the big things that was evolving. And I'd done an A-level and was interested in that, so I chose a degree that I thought was out there, but what I didn't really understand or appreciate at the time was the people who pulled together that degree were systems thinkers. And it was one of the first degrees in the UK that really had this as an underpinning discipline. And I think that's what made myself and anyone who graduated from this programme able to think differently when they got into the world of work. And it was quite interesting because some of the stories some of the students used to tell me was, I'm on a graduate programme and they're teaching us everything that you guys taught us, all the soft skills, all the things that are not really in or weren't in degrees at that time. But it was a really interesting programme. 3 great colleagues once I became faculty at Liverpool John Moores, who then took me under their wing because they had a consultancy arm as well as part of the university. And we did work with business a hell of a lot. So I had the privilege of being taught system thinking and cybernetics, and then within 12 months was the one teaching systems thinking and cybernetics. So it is the core of how I think. I don't even think of them as disciplines anymore, it's just the way I think. And if anyone has been in the world of academia, and if you haven't, I'll be saying some acronyms now that you may not understand, but I'll try and remember to explain what they mean. One of the things you get pushed into or are introduced to as part of a university framework is something, at the time it was called TCS, Technology Transfer Scheme. It's now KTPs, Knowledge Transfer Partnerships. And there where funding is available for the university to apply research in a business context. There's an organisation, often with a problem, and through that research and with the help of a researcher, you transform that organisation. And this is really where my applied research in system thinking and cybernetics started to come to the fore. So intervention 1, if we just go to the next slide, Gemma, sorry, I missed this slide. So this slide is the end in mind. So I'm not going to go through this. This is what I ended up with, and it looks very simple, but it isn't. But I'm now going to tell you the story of how we got to that. And we'll come back to that slide right at the end. So what you're going to hear now is the story of those 5 interventions. And as I said before, they get more and more complicated. The first two are based on knowledge transfer partnerships with two very, very different companies. One was a plastic extrusion business based in a place called Bootle, which is not the best place in Liverpool, but it was on an industrialist site. It was in a really old warehouse type organisation. It was cold in winter, it was too hot in summer. They had a workforce of about 45 staff, mainly male, and we put a female KTP associate in the middle of that environment. And the first thing she had to do, because we'd written it into the design, was apply the VSM to that organisation to help her understand the organisation. So we used the viable system model at the beginning as a diagnostic tool to help her understand the organisation in as quickly as possible time, so that we can then look at the art of the possible with the change. The second intervention was just as complicated but slightly different. It was a chemical waste transfer business based in St Helens. They had 90 plus staff and they were really proud because they had ISO 9000, but nothing worked. Interesting. And again, we put a KTP associate in there, and the first part of his responsibility was to use the VSM to help him understand the organisation. And it's a great tool, in my opinion, for that getting to understand moment quickly, without getting too complex of, is it right or wrong? It just helps, as you say, helps with a view of an organisation that we can then have a sensible conversation around. Interesting when you play that back to senior directors of those businesses who don't agree that that's how the world operates, but it's quite interesting when you're diagnosing and unpicking what you can see based on a framework, which is quite powerful. I'll come back and explain the other ones because they get into layers and layers of complexity. If you could just move to the next slide, please, Jenna. So in terms of what we were doing and how we were doing this, it's really important to understand, I think, you know, in any action research-based project, the role of the researcher is quite interesting, especially when you're in the heart of the change. And is it you influencing, or are you observing a situation, or are you part of actually the transformation? It's a really interesting perspective. And as this diagram sort of alludes, as a researcher, you're designing an intervention, an approach, a way of looking at something based on a problem situation or an organisation's reality in their world, with a hope of a future state which will improve where they are today. So that philosophy is quite interesting. So I'm designing something based on very little knowledge of an organisation at the early stages. As you get to know it more, you are almost part of that process because you're in there yourself, not quite employed by them, but you spend more and more time there. But you are very aware that you are trying to help that organisation get to a state where they want to go to. And we talk to businesses about vision and mission and KPIs and other things, but what is the future state they want to achieve? What is the purposeful activity of where they want to be? In many cases, it was technology adoption in these KTPs. There were organisations that had very little IT capability. They needed to be more efficient and effective, and the solutions were going to have some technology influence with no skills in the organisation to do that, and a belief that bringing in the university partner would be able to help transform that organisation. But the agent of change was often the researcher, the KTP associate, the person who was there full time, applying my methodology to a situation. So it's quite an interesting observation of how it all worked. If you just go to the next slide, you'll start to see how and where applying the VSM, not only to the diagnostic element. So this is a model of the change situation. where the situation is the organisation. In the KTP for the plastic extrusion business, situation A was the operating environment and the business environment that they understood. It also includes their local environment and a little bit more beyond that, the environment of which they operated. We're then designing an intervention, and then we're also on top of that applying some level of management coordination of the intervention to make sure we comply with KTP standards. We have 2 years to deliver something. We have to put some structure in place in order to make that happen. So if you go to the next slide, we're all aware of, well, many of you will be aware of the, don't you love online? We're all probably familiar with the structure of the VSM. And I'm not going to go into the detail of that. That's not the purpose of today. But having something that works on different levels, that diagnostic tool to help us understand a situation, but also a tool to help us manage a situation as well, is how I applied the VSM to my research methodology. So if you just go to the next slide, Gemma, what you'll see is this both overlaid in that the process for the research is also managed by the tool, which is the viable system model. And the intervention itself, as we talked about earlier, has got an element of the viable system model within it as well. So it's quite an interesting dichotomy of the change process. But it helped me with structure. It helped me with the tools to diagnose, and it helped me with the tools to design a future which had those feedback loops in. So let me tell you a bit more about what happened in intervention A, the real juicy stuff. So we go into an organisation, we explore where we perceive we are today. We understand a little bit more about current situation and the future state of what the organisation wants to achieve. But now the change management side of me kicks in, and it's how do we involve the people and take them with us on this journey? And that's a really interesting thing about any change programme. So in this organisation, you can imagine, take yourself to this plastic extrusion business, a really industrial setting, a workforce with great skills in engineering and manufacturing processing, not in management or business development. You've got a predominantly male workforce. We have a female researcher in the middle of all of this, highly clever individual. You have a team of academics who come in from time to time supporting this individual. How do you get everybody on board? Well, you involve them in helping them understand the pink part of this diagram, helping them understand their own situation. And we did this by using creativity. We created something called a challenge event. We called it in the end a challenge event. It was a whole day workshop where we took the whole workforce away from the organisation and we used tools, techniques, methods to help them understand who they were, where they are, and where they wanted to be as an organisation. There's a bit of resistance that comes with some of that, but it's also a joy taking people on a journey. So what does a challenge event look like? Well, it starts with, prior to the challenge event, we designed an all staff survey, basically a staff survey which asks you what you think about certain things. And that again was based on some of the principles of design of the VSM, but not in that language, more in a language which those people understood. So a process is effective, is communication clear, blah, blah, blah. And they filled in a questionnaire prior to coming to the event. And the first thing at the event is we play back their survey. Here's the responses. So literally, we put the mirror up and say, we asked you, you said, here's the results. And even when you hear and see those results, and they're, you know, quantifiable and numbers and things behind all of that, people are reticent and say, but I didn't answer that question like that. Well, no, this is the collective result. So not everybody may think the same way you do, which was an interesting discussion to have in the room. And then we go, well, the results are the results. And from those results, these are 5 or 6 areas where we might want to look a little bit deeper. That's that point. Let's have another go by using another tool. And we used metaphors. So we had 5 metaphors. I can't remember all of them, but things like, if our organisation was a newspaper, what would it be? If our organisation was an animal, what would it be? If our organisation was an item of clothing, what would it be? And there were a couple more. And we made them individually to start with, come up with examples of what that might be. So that's fine. Keep it to yourself to start with. Then in small groups, share your answers, and then collectively select one that you as a small group agree on and play that back to the whole room. Absolutely hilarious, because the stories that came out, the reasons why people said they were, you know, an elephant and not a jaguar, gets really under the skin of the real culture in the organisation. We're too slow, we're not agile, we can't do this, we can't do that. It was the storytelling behind the metaphors that really helped us again reinforce A, the views of the staff survey, B, the intelligence we had from an individual with no prior knowledge of this organisation, the KTP associate going into the organisation and using the VSM as a diagnostic tool, and then some of these insights from the storytelling. You've got almost different ways of looking at the organisation to go, we're a little bit clearer now of the actual situation. The ambition now is to take us over here. If this is where we are, these are some of the things we need to fix. A, they understand that because they've been part of that conversation. B, they now get a vision of the future is going to be different. It may be a little bit scary because I can't use a handheld computer at the time, or the machinery is going to have some new digitalisation attachments to it so that actually we do know if an order's gone through the shop floor and so on and so forth. But they got the point. And in the change management world, it was that buy-in and those simple tools to help them with understanding that got us through this process. At the end of 2 years, it was an absolute transformation. And we ran a number of those challenge events throughout the programme. So each time we came up with a problem statement, we'd use creativity tools, not the same ones. We ended up using some different ones to take us forward and help take the people with you on the journey. Does that make sense? Okay. It's good to get feedback. Can't get feedback online. It's good to get feedback. Thank you. So case study number 2, same scenario, same process, same methodology, same structure because we had a KTP. This time going back to the chemical waste company. Yeah. Really interesting story about that one. The day I walked into that organisation, it was very old-fashioned, sort of 70s style, 2-storey building. Downstairs was where the chemical waste was brought in and processed, and upstairs was sort of office buildings. So I walked into the building and it was almost taking you back to the science lab in school, you know, that smell of chemicals. And they actually took chemical waste away from schools. So it's not huge volumes of this. It was things that instead of pouring them down the sink, you put them into vessels and we'd collect them and we'll process them. Don't throw those chemicals down the drain, otherwise you'll have no drains. So it was a really interesting organisation because it took you straight back to your science lab. But I walked into the building this day, never met the MD before. There was a partnership, ownership of the company. And I walked upstairs and I went into reception, and the lady said, "Oh, you must be Anne. Come in, would you like a cup of tea?" And I sat down and I'm just sitting in reception. She said, "Oh, Rob's just nipped out, he won't be long." I said, "Oh, no, no problem, no problem." Next thing, the door goes, bang, opens. This guy marches in, only a small guy, marches in, shouts something to the poor receptionist, then throws his car keys into what was a box in the corner of the room. And I'm sitting observing all of this, thinking, see? Anyway, marches back out, and she just started laughing. The reception lady just started laughing, and I said, "What's the matter with you?" She went, "That's Rob." I thought, oh my God, that meeting's going to be interesting. His approach, you just knew how the culture was going to be just by observing someone's behaviour in the first 5 seconds of meeting them. He didn't know who I was. And then I walked into his office and he went, "Oh, you're that academic one. Suppose we're going to have a chat." It's like, "Look, I don't need to be here. You need me. We can talk about what we're going to do and how we're going to take you forward. But if you don't want it to be me and you want it to be someone else, I can send someone else." "No, you'll do, I suppose." And I wasn't sure I wanted to get into this relationship, but then his business partner came in the room who was the complete opposite. And I thought, I now know how this business works. You deal with the people and you deal with the customers. Yeah, it was an interesting first meeting. Anyway, same thing, similar process in terms of how it was managed. Situation completely different. They employed, as I just said before, about 90 odd staff. So a bigger culture to try and untangle. They had what they thought were really good processes because they had ISO 9000, but could have failed at any point because it didn't really work. And we went in and we did a very similar thing. We went in, the KTP associate spent 3 months understanding the organisation, interviewing people, understanding how it worked, speaking to customers, using the VSM as a diagnostic framework. And at the end of that first period, and this happened in the earlier one, there was a report that was presented. It was quite an academic report, but it was one of those. It was in the KTP proposal that at this point we get a report. And because this is government funded, they like to see something physical. So a good report's always good, even though it doesn't really mean anything. And hello, welcome. It's okay. It's a little bit odd that I'm presenting from the back because the camera's at the front, so that's just the way it is. Thank you. Okay. So the beginning of that was quite interesting, but again, how do you get a whole workforce aligned to a change that they didn't even know? Because if you think about Rob, he was not going to tell that workforce change was on its way. His counterpart would have done, but it was just going to happen. But that wasn't going to transform this organisation. So again, we ran something, we said it worked really well. It was a challenge event. We started with that data collection. That was always an important starting point for us. That survey tool was quite useful. We then used metaphors again, and again, when you've done this over and over, you get very similar things coming through, but those stories really give you those cultural insights that really help you understand the barriers, the challenges that implementing something new will always have to overcome. But it gives you those insights to be able to be prepared for those rather than they come and smack you in the face before you know it's happening. So if I pause there, I probably had enough material at that stage to write the PhD, but I'm a little bit of a sucker for, I don't know if it's good enough. Let me try it again. So the next KTP that landed on my desk was a really interesting one because it wasn't your traditional manufacturing kind of organisation. Intervention 3 was a housing association. And I don't know if any of you have worked with a housing association, but they're a really interesting body and organisation. Profit is not really something they're really interested in. Care in the community is really highlighted. They're a social enterprise, so they have different ways of thinking and principles, but this organisation employed 250 staff. So we were going up a level to the kind of taking an organisation through a change programme. We also had 2 KTP associates, which was also interesting. One looking at the technology transformation, and at the time it was allowed, it wouldn't be allowed now. Someone was looking at the customer journey and implementing marketing processes and so on. So we had 2 separate KTPs doing slightly different things, but with the same organisation. They had to be aligned. And what became really apparent is really quickly, the KTP associate who'd started with the VSM analysis got way more understanding of the organisation than the traditional marketing approach that had come from understand your market, understand your customers, but really hadn't got into, well, how does it work around here? Which the structure of the VSM allowed someone to get into. And the 2 KTP associates would have conversations 3 months in. How do you know that? Oh, I've applied this model. Well, how does that get you to think like that? Because we look at it this way, and those 2 perspectives were really, really interesting. Both valid, but really interesting how they either came to the same conclusion or came to completely different conclusions, because one used one tool and one used a slightly different model of a tool. But we were then still going on this journey of transformation. All of these programs are about transformation. But what was a really interesting stakeholder in the housing association was the tenant, who had to be consulted as part of a change initiative. Even if it didn't really directly affect them, it was one of their policies to involve all of the stakeholders. So again, we used the challenge event as the methodology, the philosophy of getting people together. We didn't need to do the survey with the tenants at that stage, but we got them involved. And we used superheroes as the metaphor to help them tell stories. So we were looking at particular problem statements, but we were using superheroes. And the funniest story I think I've got that I can share with you is we were in a big hotel in the middle of St. Helens. There were an aging population of tenants in this housing association. They had an elderly village, and it was the elderly village community who came along. So we had people who were a bit more mature like me. And we were asking them to try and tell us what the problems were in their environment, so that we could think of solutions, but help them think of solutions. And we gave everyone cards with superheroes on and little descriptions of the superpowers of the superhero, and then asked them to tell a story. If you were that superhero, what would you do in your community to make it better? And I always remember this little old lady, and she was so sweet. She said, I really need to stand up to do this. And I said, okay. So she stood up, spun round like Wonder Woman would do. She said, I'm Wonder Woman, and my superpower is this. The problem in my community is I've got a little back entry behind my house. I don't know who's walking up and down there. I hear things, but I don't know who's walking up and down there. If I had a superpower, I'd zoom over and I'd look down and I'd see who it was, and then I could ring the police and I could tell them to come and help me. And it was so interesting that someone said, well, that technology exists. You don't need to be a superpower. We can put some cameras there and we can help you know that that's a safe environment, because you are scared by that, but we can overcome that. And she was, oh, that'd be really nice. But there was story after story like that, where just giving people power with a superpower helped them create solutions that they believed they'd thought of. So buying into having a camera would have been, why are you doing that? You're looking at me, you're observing me coming in and out. It would have been a problem statement, as opposed to, here's where a solution can really help overcome a challenge. So in the housing association, we did a number of challenge events based on a number of scenarios, using different teams coming together. But what came apparent really quickly probably because of the story of the little old lady. Later that day, forgot to tell you, later that day in this event, in this hotel in St. Helens, the fire alarm went off in the afternoon of like pulling everything together. We had to evacuate the whole hotel. And the only place to go was across this dual carriageway. And we all ended up in like McDonald's to give everyone a cup of tea to really settle people down. And then everyone really loved it because they had a lovely day out. But it was like, we need to pull all this together. We had just about enough information to make use of it, but it was a really interesting, you just have to go with the flow sometimes. So, but what became apparent really quickly in the culture is, when are we having our challenge day? When are we going to have this day where we have fun? Or when are we going to participate in this? The participatory element became a, I want to get involved, rather than, oh God, what are we doing today kind of moment. By making it fun, by making it interactive, by making it the positive in that the outcomes were driven by you and the solutions were driven by the people in the room, rather than a consultant coming in and telling us what we needed to do. Also knowing that we knew where we wanted to go, and some of the solutions they were coming out with was where we wanted to take things anyway. So it's a win-win when you not contrive, because that's not the right word, engineer a process by which the outcome falls naturally. So that was a really successful KTP. It won awards. It won awards for its participation. It won awards for its inventions and new processes. And they became a really successful social enterprise that they were bought out by a bigger organisation a couple of months later. But that's another story for another day. So I've now got enough information to write up this PhD. That's when the university decided, sorry, this is now totally off tangent. I do go off tangent now and again, but I will come back to the story. The university decided that they brought change consultants in. So I was now subject group leader of the information systems group. I had 12 staff, and most of my team taught across a number of programs across the university, because information systems is almost everywhere, and there's only one small program with a small number of students in the heart of that. But we had 13 staff, and the information management group had another 14 staff. And I was at home marking one Friday afternoon, just like today. And one of my team rang me up and went, Anne, you coming to this presentation today? And I went, oh no, it's got nothing to do with us, because I'd been briefed by my boss. I think you need to get here. They've just told us to shut us down. No. How bad communication can be in an organisation like a university, who teaches change management, but don't speak to people who do change management, which is really interesting. And I then rang my boss and said, Doug, what's going on? And he said, nothing. I said, well, my team have just told me there's just been announced that they're closing our department. No, it can't be. Oh, hang on a minute, I did see something in a briefing. But it can't be us. Well, it is. And we've now got 20-something unhappy people all thinking their jobs are at risk. So he said, let me make some phone calls. So he made a couple of phone calls and he went, yeah, that's right. Okay, that's nice. Okay, let me do some work over the weekend. Can we get in front of the consultants on Monday? And he said, yeah, let's do that. So myself and my colleague, data-driven individuals, spent the whole weekend doing timetable allocations to prove that each of us, I needed 2 more staff for the workload that we had, and she needed 1 more staff. And we presented this to the consultants, who said, oops, we've got it wrong, haven't we? Which part of the system did you not understand when you were unpicking all of this? Just because you've got a really small program that attracts small numbers, because it just by nature is small numbers, doesn't mean to say that the value of the people who support that discipline are not utilised well across the university. Oh yes, we've made a mistake, which then I was totally disillusioned by the organisation, and I resigned about 2 months later, after everybody's jobs were secured, and I just thought, I don't want to be here anymore. So I jumped ship and set up my own business. I just started a project. I got strong links into the Northern Automotive Alliance, which is a local voluntary organisation, but they're a membership organisation of automotive companies in the northwest, of which there are an awful lot of automotive supply chain businesses. And they just won some ERDF money at the time to do a change programme. And they'd asked me while I was at the university to design something for them. And I said, could I do this as consultancy? And they were like, yeah, absolutely, because we want you to do it. So I said, okay. So now I've left the university, I'm now a consultant, but I've got this opportunity to apply all this stuff again in a completely different context. So they introduced me at the time to a big OEM, a big machine, as was employing a couple of thousand people in the automotive sector. And I started by going in there because they had had a huge change programme, a massive change programme. So this now is moving into intervention D. So this large organisation had managed change internally for the past 3 or 4 years. It had been really successful. They'd done a lot of the things that we all talk about taking people with you on a change and taking people on a journey. They branded it Blue Sky. And I was interested to sort of map out from a research perspective how the success had been made, and they wanted to, we're sort of struggling now to next steps. We sort of got all the low-hanging fruit now. What's the next steps for this? So I spent 3 months diagnosing. This time it was me as the researcher in the centre of it all, using the VSN, unpicking what they'd done, trying to see where change had been effective and then where sometimes it hadn't been, and then sat with the senior management team and said, this is really good. Here's some areas where it could be improved, but let me start to show you something I've been developing, which was this challenge event toolkit. So when you've got a lot of what's in here, but you've just not got the structure to implement it, and it looks like you're using the same people over and over again to be the change catalyst, you need to extend that a little bit more. So let's apply this within the next round of your change model process, and let's measure the impact and see if we can take it to the next level, which we did over the next 12 months, and it was really successful. At that stage, the Northern Automotive Alliance again had some further money from I don't know if it was a Horizon project at the time, but it was some, maybe it may have been more ERDF money, and they said, we'd like to do what you've done with the big organisation now with the supply chain. So the supply chain are really behind the curve with innovation. They're really behind the curve with change. They're not adopting new approaches. And if we can't get the supply chain to be a bit more agile, that will drive change in the big organisation, because that's where real innovation happens. So I said, oh, this will be really interesting. So what we did in that innovation, I think the next slide, Gemma, it may be a couple on, but let me keep going. Keep going, I'll come back to this one. Keep going. Yeah, no, one more. Yeah, so this was the Blue Sky programme. So I went in, as we said before, to audit the processes, but then design the future for them. So if you just go on to the next slide, it'll show, next one, sorry, apologies. So this was where we then did the supply chain programme. So the supply chain programme was 10 organisations who were suppliers into the OEM. They were fairly close in, not in relationships, but in logistically. So they could travel in and we could bring them together. So what we really designed was the framework by which the large organisation can support a multiple of small organisation in transformation. So they become the catalysts for change. So we, first of all, had to train them a little bit in the approach, the methodology, coaching skills, and so on and so forth. And we also had to do, in the phase 1 side, the strategy development and getting the buy-in of the 10 individual supply chain companies. And they were all completely different in size. They were all completely different in nature. Some were fabrication organisations. Some were actually service organisation. One was a printing company who did a lot of printing into the OEM. Another one was a parts metal fabrication unit. They supplied multi-million fastenings into this supply chain, all completely different. They all knew of each other but didn't know each other. How do you then help these guys innovate using this framework? So I designed it using the VSM again as a structure to design the interventions. And the key here is helping them, each individual, to understand their own starting point, using creativity, using certain principles. And the link was, the hook, the perception of why they were on this transformation program is to help them look good with the OEM, so they're a preferred partner for a long term. So we trained, I think it was 22 champions from the OEM in change management principles, in coaching, because they were going to coach these organisations into transformation. We explained the methodology and the approach we were going to take. We used the survey that we designed in intervention 1 and 2 as the culture survey tool in each of the 10 small businesses that we were working with to get a baseline assessment. They knew they were coming to A, innovate, and B, transform. So they knew they were going to go from finding and identifying opportunities, moving them forward and implementing them within their organisations, and that they were part of a cohort. So being powerful, that they were also on a journey with others. So the first thing we did was got the senior buy-in of each of the small businesses. They signed up for this. It was all free for them, but they knew they were getting free consultancy in their eyes. They knew they were going to be coached by someone from the OEM. So they trusted them because they knew them. And we went and evolved this process. We did baseline evaluations. We played that back to them. We then had challenge events where they identified opportunities. They then chose and selected which of those opportunities they were going to progress. And the coach from the OEM would coach them on that innovation process and the change management side of all of that. And we measured at the end a cultural shift. So we did the culture survey again, and we measured the impact in new product development or process improvement or cost savings or whatever they decided to do. The really interesting thing that came out of this was twofold. One, I remember going into the OEM and I was meeting all the champions for an update on how you're getting on. And the MD, a guy called Bob, called me into his office. And I said, "What's the matter, Bob?" And he went, "We need a word." Okay, what happened? Thinking, oh my God, disaster's happened. And he went, "Can you tell my managers to stop coaching me?" I went, "Okay, that's not a bad thing." He went, "Can't tell them what to do anymore. They're up with coaching. And I know they're doing it and I know it's coming from you." Okay, that's okay. I don't think that's a bad thing, but I'm not going to tell them. But he was furious that he couldn't now tell his management team how to do what they do every day. It was really interesting. But what was happening is those coaches were going into the small organizations. They were seeing the agility, they were seeing the passion, they were seeing how people were doing things, and they were taking it back. They were running mini challenge events. They were doing mini design sprints with their own teams. They were making changes, and Bob didn't know about them. So organically, they were taking back what they were helping the small businesses do, but they were also really proud of the small businesses. So after 2 years that this ran for a start and finished 2 years, we had a celebration event where the champions in the small business, and there were 3 or 5 depending on the size of the organisation, each working on one or several projects throughout that time, presented their journeys and what they were proud of and where they'd had hiccups and so on and so forth. But it was all in one big room. It was a real celebration of achievements and so on and so forth. And then we got the coaches in to give their view of everything, and everyone got certificates, and it was all a lovely day. But again, as a researcher observing all of this, what happened organically was not what we'd intended to happen. Some of the unintentional outcomes were far more powerful than the intended outcomes, but the process worked. So using the viable systems model to design that structure and manage it to get us to the end helped, because it gave me credence that I was doing the right thing. But being able to measure it, what became really apparent was 2 things. One, that the baseline evaluation tool was a really powerful tool to help us start the process. And years later now, I still use that exact tool as a culture survey tool. I've used it now for 15 years. I've got 15 years of SME data in that, and I've got a benchmark tool of perceptions in 40 questions based on 8 topic areas. So it gave me a measurement tool that I'm really comfortable, and I use it today. I deliver on the Made Smarter leadership program. For those of you who know about Made Smarter, I use that culture survey as not a diagnostic, to help the organisation put the mirror up to them by asking everyone in the organisation to complete it, and here's your report. And again, almost when you present those results of that survey, which came from all of this research, when you present the surveys back now to small businesses, I've done it for that long, I can read the data and say, oh, do you have this problem? And they go, how do you know that? And that's because that tells us that. It's quite interesting that over time, you almost can get under the skin really quickly. Anyway, that's me going off on a tangent again. But this was really, really, for me, transformational. And I'm really proud of what was achieved. And you think at that stage then, I'd just write this up. Until one day, I was asked by the head of the Northern Automotive Alliance to go to a meeting with what was at the time the Northwest Development Agency, who regulated some of the funding we had as part of phase 2 of this. And I was in the Northwest Development Agency in Warrington, having a coffee with this guy, and I was like, Sammy, what do you want today? And he went, I haven't seen you for ages. Okay. And he just pulled this guy out of nowhere, this guy called Paul, and he said, Paul, someone I want you to meet. Like, this is definitely contrived. Sammy, what do you want us to talk about? No, you two just need to get your heads together. You're the head of the Manufacturing Institute. She has got a great change programme. Talk to each other. And I went, okay, we will. Did you know that was happening? He went, no. I introduced myself, and then there was intervention E. So I explained what we'd done with the automotive sector, and he went, right, I've got some funding, I've got SMEs. Can you do exactly the same thing? We've not got an OEM, but can you create a community of change? We recruited another 10 companies on a project, very similar formula. If you just click forward and I think forward, Gemma, again, this was intervention E, which again, it's a model. The organisations that we were part of needed a model. They didn't understand some fancy diagrams, but this one thought it talked through the story. Again, we had coaches, but these were coaches who we paid for to come in instead of having someone in the supply chain being the coach. We had 10 organisations of varying sizes. They had change champions in the organisations. We ran challenge events. We did baseline surveys. We designed it using the viable systems model and managed it using that approach. And then we implemented, and again had a celebration event. It ran for 12 months. And this time round, what I wanted to get from this as a researcher was real measurements of impact financially, because it was important for the North West Development Agency to say, that's how much we spent, but this is the return on the investment. So it was less important with the Northern Automotive Alliance, but for this project, for me, it was the financial impact. How can you measure cultural shift? How can you measure efficiencies and embed that as a way of thinking in the organisation? So we were quite creative in baselining. Where are we now? Rudimentary to start with. How many people does it take to do that? What equipment to use? What physical resources to use? Let's put some kind of value on it, and then measure the improvement, the cost savings or the efficiencies or the whatever we achieved by doing all of that. And did a baseline culture with each organisation, and we did an outbound culture survey. Interestingly, because this was 12 months, in many situations, the baseline culture assessment got worse when we got to 12 months in, which was really interesting for me. There wasn't, well, two things were happening here. The baseline survey was people's perception at that time, but because they'd been part of the transformation, they were now more critical in the second assessment of where they were. So they were more favourable at the beginning and less favourable at the end. And we went back 12 months later and did another assessment, and they'd all gone back up again. So it was knowing more about our surroundings gives us a better baseline, because the baseline was based on perceptions of ignorance, if that's something to see. And then I said, if I don't write this up, no one's going to talk to me ever again. So I wrote it up, and everything else is history. So I think I'm going to stop there. I'm going to ask questions, because there's a lot being said and there's not a lot of theory in that. So if you want to tease it out and pick out some questions, I'll be happy to take some questions.
Okay, so if there's any in the room, that would be great. Also, if anybody has got any online, if you want to put them in the chat, then either myself or Gemma can read them out for you. Are there any questions or observations in the room? That was a very quick chat. Easy. Fantastic stuff. So, so I'm speaking from a civil service context at the moment, where we're really interested in sort of practically applying this kind of, how can we change the culture, how can we get people in the room. The big barrier always tends to be that initial bit where you sort of go, oh right, so we're going to bring everybody together, we're going to have this full day, how do you get that initial level of buy-in before you've even done anything, to get the people with enough influence to give you the time to try anything?
I think it's even before you start anything. It's almost like saying, well, this is the situation we have today. If we do nothing, we're not going to get anywhere. Can we experiment a little bit? And people tend to like experiments. I don't like using the word pilot, because that's not the right analogy. But an experiment is, we need a change process here. I've got an idea. Can I apply it in a nice little area? And can we see what the impact of that is? And if you are looking at it from a process for change rather than a change initiative, it's the methodology of change that you're trying to embed within the organisation, not just change the organisation, if that makes sense. So the experiment will test out what works, what doesn't work, and not everything works.
So just to follow up, because so one of the things I found, I mean, only been in the civil service a couple of years, but I found that everybody has a memory of the last time we tried this, usually negative, which is what makes it hard to get that initial, can we experiment? No, we're not having more time wasted. Did any of these projects have history that you needed to overcome?
Oh yeah. Many of the small organisations we worked with had huge, I've got photographs of teams at challenge events And we had an organisation that were, what did they manufactured plasterboard. So they were all in high vis, and they were all in a room probably about this size, and we probably needed a room twice this size, but we've got about 80 people in this room, and there's all these burly guys with big high vis, and they all sat there at the beginning like this. So resistance from people is often the big thing, but more than ever, you could overcome them. It's the resistance of managers. And then the stories of, we tried this 12 years ago and it failed. Great. So we're not going to do those failings again, are we? Because you've got that history and you're making sure we don't get it wrong again. You're a great person to have in this room. So doing your stakeholder mapping and doing your stakeholder initial conversations to find out if we tried this before, to get the grapevine, to understand the hurdles, and to try and put them to bed before you get in the room. But you have to find, I often find you have to find one part of the organisation that just trusts the process. Just, that's my analogy, my mantra, just trust the process. We're going to take you somewhere and it's going to be better than it is now. And if it goes wrong, we'll learn from it. It doesn't always have to be successful. Sometimes the best learning comes from when we fail. And then at least the process of change and the review part means that we're learning as an organisation rather than just, well, that didn't work. Okay, let's stop. It's having the mindset. The mindset change is it's not easy. I'm not saying change is easy. That's why I'm grey. But it's making it easy. The challenge event, when it was first developed in the Housing Association, we got a group from across the organisation who'd been to a couple of challenge events and who used some of the different activities, and we said, wouldn't it be great if you created the toolkit and bring in new tools? So go and do some research on, running workshops or bringing people along or using metaphors or using analogies or whatever you want to do. And we had this huge document that they'd pulled together and they were really proud of it, but it was owned by them as well. And that was important that they had owned it. We created a similar one in another organisation and it was very similar. It's just the ownership of something and the ability of someone to try and create their own future. Getting people engaged in that and not being you the expert is not the way forward. If you're the expert in the room, people will just shut up and wait for you to talk. Which is why Bob, my MD of the huge manufacturing organisation in the automotive sector, who said, stop my team coaching me, stopped asking me questions after a while because he'd seen what the power of his team working with others was. I've got another, I've answered your question. Yeah. I've got another story about Bob. I went in one day, there's two really large manufacturing organisations as part of a supply chain, both OEMs in Merseyside. If you've ever been there, you probably know who exactly I'm speaking about. One, I was doing some strategy development with their whole strategic team. We took 8 weeks all collectively exploring what the strategy should be for the plant, spent weeks, the whole management team facilitating discussions. And I thought, oh, I haven't seen Bob for a while. And Bob was next door. And I thought, I'll go and see him while I'm here. I'll have a cup of tea with Bob. So we just finished in Organisation A, getting to the end of a strategy that they were all happy with, which they were then going to deploy. And I walked into Bob's office, and on the wall was almost a mirror image of what we just developed next door. And I went, oh, you and your team have been busy. Oh, I threw that up this afternoon. Do you think that one was going to work? No one was part of it. It was Bob's plan. It was always going to be Bob's plan. Yeah.
I've got some questions, so I'll go to online, then to go to live, then online again. So the first one online is from Barry Roberts, who you will probably remember.
I do know. Hi, Barry.
Cohort when we were undergrads. Hi, Anne. Did your work involve using other methodologies or frameworks, let's say Six Sigma, ADCAR, etc.? If so, how did these compare to VSM and your framework?
A really interesting question, Barry. Sometimes you go into organisations that have these tools already embedded, and you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So AdCar's one. I'm working with an organisation at the moment that's their methodology. And sometimes you have to use the tools of the organisation and then take them on a journey with you, rather than saying that isn't going to work for whatever reason. So it's about that change culture. So yes, I have seen where we use it, and then I tend to work with an organisation for a while and then go, oh, would it be interesting if we look at it this way, and then introduce something slightly different to help them explore something different. So I don't ever contradict. I'll work with what I've got in many situations, and then introduce small steps or have conversations using that language, and then this is based on this, and bring the theory in second. That's usually the best way. Nice to see you anyway, Bob. I can't see you.
Okay, so Mike.
So multiple things going on at once. You've got your sponsors that want their thick reports, whether or not anyone's going to read it. You've got accountability, senior management. You've got people who see change as a project with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you've got what for me is the most interesting bit, what I would call the generative bit, where you're helping people make sense of the world, you're helping them see new possibilities, you're helping them make progress, all those kind of things. I'm interested to what extent did you see those as being in tension with each other, even in conflict with each other?
There was a lot of conflict, which is why the VSM helped with predicting. I think before it happened, that I had to go and have those conversations with the senior management team regularly to keep them up to date. And if they were happy things were going in the right direction, it was normally okay. It was when things do go wrong in these change initiatives, people sometimes try something without permission, whereas just consulting, was it giving you permission? So you then have to teach the approach rather than, okay, right, let's go back a step. You're just running too fast here. Communication is key with all of this. What's going to happen? How is it going to happen? What will it be when we get there? Senior management level, what are we going to get from this? How do we know we're going to get there? Early wins so that you can show progress with all of this. Not wait until the end to give all the results. Letting people who are making the changes stand up in front of other people and show how that change is happening, and being proud of some of that, overcome some of those barriers. It is spinning plates, juggling balls and skipping all at the same time, which is why when you're doing all of that and you set it off, it's good to step back and go, okay, how's this being managed? Where can I assist with that process so that they can just get on with it? And being an outsider in that situation often helps. Just leave them alone, let it work. But it's never easy. No. And it is complex.
We've got another question online from Angus K. This is, how easy or difficult was to support people to use the VSM? So did you have to simplify it, present it in a particular way? In their experience, once they bring out the VSM diagram, people switch off.
Yeah. Yeah. So I used to teach the VSM as a senior lecturer in John Moores, and again, it's easy to teach a methodology. It's how you apply it in practice. So when I taught it, I always taught it with the caveat of the case studies I had to try and demonstrate to people what the power of it actually is. When we come to the KTP associates, some of them had prior knowledge because they'd been ex-students of mine, some didn't, and it was interesting, the ones that didn't, we had to sit for a little bit of time, explain, explore, but again, it wasn't, there you go, it was, okay, what we're looking at here, and you start with small parts, have a look at this first, oh, and then this will help you with that bit. So you piecemeal it a little bit, and sometimes it's showing rather than giving. this is how I see the world using the VSM. How do you see the world using the VSM? Use it as a tool, as a lens, then go, how are you getting on? It is only a tool. It's not an exact science. It's a tool for an intended purpose. It gives a lot of insights, but mixed, it does depend. Don't just say, go and read that and then apply it over there, because that is going to just turn everyone off. Because if they get through the first chapter, they'll might be okay. They might survive.
That's right. I feel that answers your question, Angus. Is there any more in the room?
So I, as you know, got interest in SMEs and systems thinking. One of the things I found through my research is that as a researcher, you can get involved, you can show people how to use various methodologies, so not just viable systems model, but soft systems methodology, critical systems heuristics, and you may use them in a singular way or a multi-methodology way. The issue I have found, and what my research is showing, is that actually, whilst people happen to engage, whilst there is a resource in the room to show them how to use it, and actually they will take on board a changed perception of ideas, so their concept of things like interaction or linkages, relationships may change. They won't actually take away using the actual tools, so you won't go away and go back in a year's time and find somebody that's been used to, has been part of a VSM intervention or intervention with VSM, using VSM. Now they might think some of the major basic concepts they've learned, sort of thinking about the environment as a separate thing, but they won't actually utilise the tools. Now, in a big organisation where that could be mandated, that could be different. But in a small organisation where it's down to an individual, do you find that the organisation, because the first three that you mentioned was SMEs, do you find that they actually take the tools or just the basic concepts?
Both. I think majority, just like you, some get it and then live by it. If you can embed it as part of the processes in which they operate, then it's going to be have a longer life. But you often get one or two individuals that really get it and then utilise it in a powerful way. But they're few and far between. It's not often the case. I've run a programme, said before, at the moment, Made Smarter, Leading Digital Transformation. It's for leaders of small businesses. We have them for 12 weeks. They have some face-to-face sessions. They have some online sessions, webinars. They have peer groups. They're on a journey. Well, my philosophy in engaging them is give them a tool. So I call everything a tool. It might be a 2x2 matrix. It could be a real sophisticated analysis tool. I call everything a tool and break it down to its simplest component part, and you build upon that. You're scaffolding their journey with that. And at the end of the programme, they present back on this programme their digital transformation roadmap for the next 5 years. Very conceptual, really conceptual. But what was interesting, I've just ran one of these this week and we got to the final session. And there's people playing back to me how they've applied the tools and what the learning is from that. That for me is a win. No matter how small the tool, stakeholder mapping, stakeholder analysis, simple things helps them navigate a journey. But the most powerful thing in the room is when someone applies it and gets something from it and then tells somebody else. And then that inquisitive mind comes, oh, if you've got that, maybe I can get that. The power of the cohort in taking people on a journey is much more powerful than me standing up and telling people about a tool. So everything I do is 5 minutes of me, 20 minutes of them applying it in their situations, talking about it, sharing with each other. That's a different way of looking at it. Oh, I wouldn't have looked at it like that. They're much more powerful conversations, but that final playback, I think every single person who presented, they have to do. And again, give them a tool, give them a template to present their playback, and they populate the sides. they choose different tools to put on there for different perspectives, but they're all trying something new, and that for me is a win. They all go away with, I feel like I've now got a toolkit. If they can use one or two of those things again, I've succeeded. Doesn't have to be, this is the viable system model and this allows you to do this. This is an element of that. Just make it a really simple creative tool.
So breaking it down to the basic component parts of a
usable
larger
parts.
tool.
And exactly, I mean, the viable system model is a great example, you know, just helping people understand there's an environment you operate in and it's complex. That's huge. Then you can get into 20 other questions that help them see their own situation in a different way, but it doesn't have to be complex.
This question is very similar. So this is from Jay Holland. I'm going to assume that's Jonathan. It's great to see you online. He asks, can you start the conversation with a VSM, or is it better to build up to it? So, for example, 15 minutes of PIG or 30 minutes of SSM, an hour of CSH, and then VSM for half a day. So you build up the credibility or value. So could you?
It's a really interesting question, and I think it depends who you're talking to in all of these situations. It depends on the situation. I've been in a room where I've presented the VSM to a senior manager in a medium-sized business by me diagnosing their business using the VSM just as an observational tool to help them understand the power of it. And we've had a really interesting conversation as a result of that. But then on the other side, if you want to be able to use something like the VSM, you need to understand the underlying principles. So in a teaching context at a university level, year one builds on year two, builds on year one, year three builds on year two. You need the foundations, and sometimes understanding the foundations means you understand the more sophisticated tool in a much more powerful way. So you're more able to appreciate the complexity, whereas if you go in with that, you turn people off. I had two different sort of situations to that. We had the business information systems program where systems thinking was year one, systems modeling was year two, business analysis with a whole load of tools plus cybernetics was year three. It was a journey. But always alongside that were real case studies to apply those tools on, and you felt like you were building a toolkit. We had an MBA module which was just managerial cybernetics, and it, for some people, was a breath of fresh air because they were sick of the traditional methods and models that they'd had, that this was new and innovative. And some of those were the most transformational, exciting conversations we had. Trust the process. This is going to be complex, but at the end of it, you'll be able to have more than a Swiss Army knife. It's much more complex, but it's context specific. So I don't know if it's the right answer.
Yeah, that's great. I hope that answers your question, Jonathan. Thanks for contributing. So I will go ahead.
Sure. My experience is in service, not manufacturing, so that's the context. One of the biggest challenges I find is the mindset that people are set up to be reductive. And it's kind of a two-pronged question. The first question is, to do anything with VSM, to be able to think that way and not that way. And how is that, when you arrive and you have this group of people who are taking a problem, looking for a root cause, fixing the root cause, and messing up, how do you get them from there to backing off and not trying to solve the problem? That was the first question.
Okay, shall I answer that first? I don't have an answer to all of that, but I've got a story with people are conditioned because the organisation conditions people to think in certain ways. And admitting or recognising that one way is not the only way is often the starting point of thinking differently. So we've got tools for lots of things, and some are appropriate and some are not. People like root cause analysis and people like reductionist thinking because it's safe. But sometimes experimenting again, let's try something different and see if we get a different outcome. But explaining that's the process we're going to go from. We're having rules of engagement that say, if we hear each other going back to that way of thinking, we're going to stop each other going back to that way of thinking. So not the same example, not in this context, but I do a lot of action learning groups with small business owners. And the tendency is problem solving is someone comes with a problem statement and everyone wants to solve it. And like, no, the rules are not that you're solving someone else's problem here. The rules of engagement are that you can only ask open questions to help understand their situation so they can help themselves go through to a solution. So by using the tools as a framework and everybody understanding that and policing it really quickly, you get people going squiddle, because my safe word's squiddle. And there's a long story to do with that, but having a stupid word is a safe way of going time out. That's an answer. Stop going down to answers. We're still on problem statements. We still don't understand the problem statements. So giving people tools to have conversations helps overcome that. It's not easy because you have to have people wanting to participate in that. But as long as you've got some people who will participate, others tend to follow. People are like sheep. They just follow something. So
little comment there. I mean, you can reframe away from problems and solutions.
oh yeah.
I mean, you can ask, you know, accept our present reality as a direction we would like to move in. What obstacles are in the way of that? You know, perhaps having explored what the rate would look like, what the ideal would look like, without designing anything. You know, and you're getting away from design, you're getting away from problems, you're getting away from solutions, and you're actually inviting progress to be made on a broad front. I think that's a game changer. As we're going back to what you were saying before, I think what had me smiling and nodding at what you were saying is where you were helping other people make progress. And I think that's what this is about. And looking for singular solutions and singular problems is itself a problem. You know, I think we need to reframe when we find ourselves getting into that trap.
I think, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think I'm coming back to your question. It's the processes, the conditions for change evolve different kinds of processes. So it's almost a bit of VSM, which says, well, the rule sets in this one. And if that's creativity, if that's open mind, they're the rule sets. And if you have some rules on the wall and people can, I hate the word rules, guiding principles. This is the way we're going to think today. You suddenly get a different point of view. You've had one question. This isn't fair.
Okay, I'll ask.
Just because you're chair.
Yeah, no, that's why I was looking at Gemma for approval.
Yeah, I think we're waiting for a second.
Yeah,
There was a
Adam's got a
second
Oh,
second.
the second
Adam's got a
question,
second.
let's go. Go on.
So I completely buy that, was that you can help people to a place where they can start to see the world differently.
Yeah.
But the new influx of people don't. And what happens is they get recontaminated by reductionist thinking because that's what schools teach them.
Yeah.
Problem solving. So with these interventions you've done,
Yeah.
have you gone back 5 years later and found that everything's the same or changed?
Different situations. So again, when you leave somewhere, things go back the way it used to be. And that's not necessarily because there's one or two individuals who just go back to the way it was. It's just new people have come along who think the other way and it goes back to the way it used to be. But in some organisations, especially the Housing Association is a great example of, they really changed the way they thought. But I think they were open-minded to start with, just by nature of the type of organisation. And you go back 2 or 3 years later and they're proud to show you the new ways they evolved that. The Housing Association started doing a strategy day at the board level using the VSM every year, because they really wanted to understand about it, and it was embedded as a way of thinking in that organisation. It's not the norm, but even if some people are still using some of the creativity tools, I'm really pleased to see that. But I can't influence, nor would I want to. It's not for me to. If it only depends on me, then I'm not going to win anyway.
So mine was as much an observation as a question, which is, you know, I feel I have to say this as a whole university, I guess. I feel that sometimes people get sucked into just using the one approach. So we're here today talking about VSM, and whereas some of the questions that are being asked, I'm sitting here as academic practitioner, I think is the word. So, academic, that's it, academic. And I'm going, actually, I wouldn't have gone into DSM at this point. I would have gone in, if I'm trying to work out what the problem might be, because people want to solve the problem, I possibly would have used soft systems methodology and gone and, you know, looked to do a root definition and Tableau. I might have used critical systems heuristics or something completely different. One of the things I find is that when you go down to using academics, a lot of them have their own favourite tools and techniques and will embed them. Whereas I would suggest if you actually start looking at through different lenses, you know, of what the problems are they mechanical? You know, that actually has a huge impact, because actually changing that idea for people, how they look at something, rather than how they solve something, can be the most powerful thing.
I liken that to, some people have preferences of things they always go to. We all have preferences of things we go to. But I always say the best thinkers have got a Swiss Army knife. And they use a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of the other. And actually what they end up with is something different for every situation, which is what the challenge event toolkit ended up being. What we're trying to do here, are we going to understanding, are we going to solution, and each separate phase had different methods, but they were in several times, because you could use the same shoehorn in any situation. So there were not sophisticated methods, there were very small tools, but there was a variety in there. And one of the things on the front page in one of the challenge kits was always try and never use the same thing twice. So you've used that, tick it off, try something different, because the variety really helped the situation. So I'm a bit like you, I like a bit of pick and mix, because one size doesn't fit everything.
Just a follow-up on that.
Yeah. So I was just thinking of Isaiah Berlin's metaphor of, you know, the fox and the hedgehog, where the hedgehog knows one big thing and the fox knows many little things. And as it were, you might have a temperamental difference. The people that they've got one method, they use it really successfully for everything, and you will always find whenever you bring them along, it's a different version of the same solution. And I mean, some of the best thinkers, you know, turn out to be reluctant hedgehogs. They think they're doing something different every time, and it just over their career turns out to be the same idea playing out. Versus the fox going, actually, in this case, this thing. And so it sounds like you're coming out as a fox. You know?
I'm not sure that's the idea.
But yeah, like, do you encounter hedgehogs in the wild? Where they're like, they've got the thing that they do, and you kind of just have to adjust to that.
Doesn't everyone have one of them in their life? Yeah, you encounter them. It's interesting having conversations with them, trying to help them see the world a little bit differently. But yeah, there's always a hedgehog in an organisation. I like using metaphors in organisations where you go, or analogies where you say, a bit like that, you know, storytelling, where you can give people permission to say, you're being a hedgehog again. Because when you give people permission to call people out, that's much more interesting than not knowing that things like that are happening. Teaching people to fish, I think it's back to your question set. Helping an organisation with a set of approaches that they can use as tools to help situations be understood and overcome. But being able to call each other out because the guiding principles are clear with everyone. Because people will go off and use, that's the most easiest thing to use today. I'm comfortable with it. Let's use a business model canvas. We love it. I'm not afraid to. I do love the business model canvas. It's a simple tool to help people to explore a situation, but it can be used in 25 different ways and people just use it one way.
Okay, looking at the time, thank you, Anne.
Thank you for having me.
It's been great to see you and to hear you and to remember where I actually started my systems thinking journey, sort of occasionally. Thank you very much for coming. I'm sure people will reach out. I know that you're active on LinkedIn. I know that you're very supportive and receptive to engagement. So on behalf of the Centre for Systems Studies and the OR Society, Gemma and myself, and Roberto, thank you very much for your time today, and we hope to get you involved in the centre in future.
Thank you.